Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Courtney Keeley, and I am the founder of Open Up, an initiative to connect and support aspiring immigration lawyers. And today I will be interviewing attorney Steve Smith. Attorney Smith has been practicing immigration law for more than 5 years. His area of practice is removal defense, specifically applications for asylum, T and U visas, and for Violence Against Women Act petitions. Mr. Smith has a JD from Western New England College School of Law, an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of Mexico, and a graduate certificate from the Center of Justice and Peace Building from Eastern Mennonite University. After college, Attorney Smith worked with Central American refugees in San Antonio, Texas, and has traveled and worked throughout Latin America. He currently sits on the board of Skyline Literacy in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Attorney Smith, hello, and thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Courtney, for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Of course. Well, I suppose I'll kick things off with the questions. The first one, why did you become an immigration lawyer?
I think I would answer that question by asking myself, perhaps, why didn't I become a social worker? Because that was what I had originally intended to study. As the years went on and I worked in various capacities and various jobs, I probably wouldn't have gone to law school if I didn't have the option to work and to be away from the academic environment, which in law school and other professional career schools is very, very time consuming and all consuming. But I think I went to law school at the time, not necessarily to practice law but to keep my options open. Eventually, the practice of law, specifically immigration law, seemed to make the most sense and seemed to be the best fit for me, given the past experience that you summarized, having worked with Central American refugees before and having followed Central American politics and issues for years.
For the next question, what are some of the greatest challenges facing immigrants today?
I would say, in my experience and what I understand, one is the threat of family separation. And the second is the lack of legal representation for non-citizens who are in removal proceedings, who are needing to appear, say, before an immigration judge, and need guidance to navigate a very, very complex system. Another challenge would be the inability, or the fear rather, of many immigrants, especially those who are out of status, who don't have, who are not in proceedings, whose presence is not known, their fear of coming forward should they be a victim of a crime. There's special immigration remedies to help people in that position. That's the Visa U, I think, that you had mentioned in your introduction.
What legal rights do immigrants have? And how does the legal system in the United States treat immigrants?
Immigrants have many of the rights that citizens have. For example, an immigrant who is charged with a criminal offense has the right to a court-appointed attorney, for example. An immigrant also has the right to be counted in the census, which has been the most recent topic of discussion, perhaps, of what rights immigrants have. Immigrants have the right to, non-citizens don't have the right to vote, but they have certainly the right to participate in certain levels of perhaps state government or a school board, perhaps. Immigrants would have the right to sue in court, I suppose, should they be the victims of fraud or a crime. I think depending on where one lives, and it's hard sometimes to separate the rhetoric, the anti-immigrant rhetoric that one hears, from the reality that people face. And so I think how immigrants are often treated in the press or in public discourse probably has an effect on how citizens view immigrants, whether it's through cultural stereotypes or or physical mistreatment, perhaps. But I don't think our country has become a very hospitable place, generally speaking, for immigrants. I think probably depending on how one is, on what one's status is, would dictate how perhaps one is being treated. I think a lot of immigrants, those that I work with, live in fear that something is going to happen to them. Immigrants also have the right to, and I think I mentioned this, who are in removal proceedings, they have a right to counsel, but not to the right to public counsel. In other words, they have the right to hire a private attorney to represent them, of course, but no right to a court-appointed lawyer to represent them in immigration proceedings.
George Mason professor Ilya Somin argues that immigration law is an area of public policy in which the government routinely gets away with oppression and discrimination that would be readily recognized as unconstitutional anywhere else. Can you speak to why immigration law defies the Constitution?
I don't know if immigration law itself defies the Constitution. I think how immigration law has been enacted or implemented has. And I think we saw that in early 2017 with the Muslim ban. How its immigration law has been implemented or promulgated through so many executive orders so quickly is dizzying. So fortunately, there are checks and balances even in immigration law.
A study by Northwestern University professor Jacqueline Stevens estimates that the federal government detained and deported some 4,000 American citizens in 2010 alone, and more than 20,000 from 2003 to 2010, due to mistakes resulting from the extremely lax procedural safeguards surrounding immigration detention and deportation. Can you speak to how immigrants are not the only ones who suffer from anti-immigrant laws and policy?
In a couple ways, one of which I mentioned briefly earlier. Say a US citizen has an immigrant parent who is forced to return to his or her home country. That would certainly affect the US citizen child. I think the immigrant population and US citizens are really intimately linked, whether we like it or not. US citizens who have immigrant relatives who may face immigration consequences at certain junctures while they're here, whether it's through a deportation or otherwise. For public safety reasons, if we deny, for example, immigrants, non-citizens, medical care, let's using the vaccine for COVID, for example, that becomes a public health risk if we don't protect everybody from a certain disease, including those who are here as non-citizens.
One thing that I might bring into consideration is what factors racial profiling might have in terms of who is detained. And I mean, I don't have any kind of specific numbers or anything on that, but I feel like racial profiling is involved with any part of policing, unfortunately.
That is indeed a reality that is unfortunate and at times has led to arrests that were unlawful and subsequently non-citizens being caught up in the ICE tangle or ICE web.
What changes would you make to the legal system to ensure immigrant rights and immigrant justice? And I know you said you're not a policy expert, but still, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Sure. Well, I'm not saying anything new by repeating what many people are calling for, immigrant rights groups, particularly, which is a pathway to citizenship for people who have been here for decades. For example, people who hold temporary protected status, or dreamers, or the DACA recipients who I mentioned earlier. I can't see a compelling reason why not to create a pathway to citizenship for those who um, fall under those two categories. I don't know how effective walls have been in history, creating walls to keep people in and keep people out. I don't think it has a great, they have a great track record to in accomplishing their purposes, and it seems building a wall is counterproductive, a waste of resources, and will not address uh, the underlying problem. Trying to guarantee a neutral immigration court system. The immigration courts fall under the Department of Justice, under the control of the Attorney General, and recently there have been attempts to, I think, not attempts to, I think there's been politicization of the immigration courts that has resulted in forcing immigration judges to hear a certain number of cases, to meet quotas essentially, and rushing through cases without giving immigrants who are in removal proceedings appearing before immigration court their chance to a fair hearing. Rejoining international efforts to address the crisis of refugees. I think the UN has estimated there are 26 million refugees in the world, excuse me. And what is our responsibility to that large population? To support the United Nations to accomplish its work in helping refugees.
How can JMU students, or I guess college and university students in general, support immigrant justice and immigrant rights?
I think very basic measures from what you're doing, Courtney, in giving people a forum to express views and opinions and share experiences, I think is important. I know it's a luxury now more than ever, but to, if possible, volunteer for a nonprofit that works with non-citizens, with immigrants, such as Skyline Literacy, on whose board I sit, or New Bridges Immigration Resource Center in Harrisonburg, which I'm not sure as much now as before, often depended on volunteers. To keep informed, that seems to be kind of a soft way to make a difference. I think a historical understanding and keeping informed are really essential to be to meaningfully make a difference in whatever one is doing. I know these are difficult times for everybody, but particularly for students, but I wish you all the best of luck. Law is a noble profession. I'm proud to be an attorney. I came to law through perhaps untraditional routes. I never saw a episode of Law and Order. I was a little ambivalent at first, but it's certainly immigration law and law itself is a mechanism to fight for change that's meaningful, that helps people who are disadvantaged.